Hi, we're in the next part, guys. Yes, in the previous part, I was talking about how there is absolutely no way to go for Christians anymore. And that while it's admirable, all of these movements, please go check out the previous part to gauge your bearings. While it is admirable, all of these movements that are trying to recalibrate society back to where it came from, there are certain things that once you have started with them, there's no turning back, you guys. There's no turning back because the progression of the gangrene is inevitably going to start to increase in proportion to the healthy leg portion, the healthy part of the equation. It's going to become increasingly more reaching of the healthy component until all that's left to do now is to amputate the leg, if you know what I mean. If you know what I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? It's indeed like a sepsis or a gangrene, some kind of an impending infection that can no longer be cured by antibiotics, like necrotizing fasciitis. So, you just gotta amputate the finger if you can't deal with it using antibiotics. Yeah, that's what all of these ideologies that are incredibly diabolical in nature, that are taking a chokehold on our societies, are. I spoke in my previous series about how it is that even the alphabet agenda, even how rejected it is in Africa, is irrelevant, because Africa is just it would be the tantamount of, in dealing with, for instance, an arm that has been, infected with necrotizing fasciitis, like flesh-eating bacteria. Africa's like this portion. It's like your upper arm. Whereas the US, for instance, would be like the very pinky that's infected. And Europe might be the palm. Places like Canada and South America might be this portion of your limb, and Africa's like the very last part to get infected because of the fact that it is being ignored in the pinky of the United States of America, and it's growing and growing and growing. It's ultimately going to get to the palm, and then this part, and then that part, right? So it doesn't matter that Africa is rejecting the colorful agenda. Africa, being literally the poorest continent on the earth, cannot afford to be cut off from the world at large. And that kind of extortion or pressure along the lines of, if you don't do this, I'm gonna do that, it's ultimately gonna catch up. Food aid is absolutely essential, and African leaders are not noble or virtuous enough to stop corruption in their governments. And so therefore they can't rebuild themselves from within themselves to not need help from the West. There will always be need for aid coming in from the West to Africa, purely because of the corruption of Africa, not because Africans cannot actually sustain themselves. They can, insofar as all the corruption would be rooted out. But it's not about to get uprooted any minute now. In South Africa, for instance, this is a sight for sore eyes. There's no better description, frankly, to speak of this particular thing. Starlink, I think that is what it is called. It is an internet service provided by the genius from South Africa called Elon Musk, who has got space station technology dwelling in the cosmos out there that has got potential to provide internet access to basically all the countries of the world without relying on their own individual telecommunications networks here in their countries that are also reliant on functioning systems of infrastructure in those countries. So it's basically like a really good deal. And it also can provide in Africa, for instance, there are patches of land that have got no access to running water, no plumbing, no access to telecommunication wires, like poles and whatnot that wire one city to the next. So much so are they remote that when you go out there, your cell phone has got no bars on it. It's got no network. Yeah, there are portions in Africa, more than any other continent, of such vast patches of land that make sure that certain people that are on the outliers of society don't know anything about internet. They don't have any access to the internet at all, and it would take their own national governments years to come up with infrastructure to get Wi-Fi to their regions. And not only would it take years, but there would also have to be an incentive, a motivation by those governments to put telecommunication services in those regions. And currently there is not sufficient enough of it. There's not enough business, bustling activity going on in those regions that could empower financially our government to a point where they would, just out of the goodness of their own hearts, decide to provide wireless networks to the rural areas, for instance. But this Starlink, that is a space satellite enabled Wi-Fi, like internet, right, that has got power or potential to enable such people as those to get free Wi-Fi. To not, maybe not so much free, our government would have to pay for it. They would have to make a deal with Elon Musk to understand, but those people would be able to finally get Wi-Fi. And when then they're able to get Wi-Fi in the rural areas, we are talking about people who, in this country, there is a problem with people getting IDs, like identification numbers, essentially being counted as South African citizens because of where it is that they were born. And when you don't have an ID, you can't write a matric. Matric is the last grade of high school. And if you can't write matric, your opportunities for getting jobs are significantly reduced. Do you understand? So to eradicate this sorrow in our nation that is unemployment, it would go a long way to avail internet access in such regions as these, such that if they do not have a home affairs office in close proximity to that rural area where they're staying, they could apply for an ID online, because there is a home affairs online available in this nation. And then once what do you call this? Once they have been approved, all they would need to do is either drive or take a public transportation to the nearest home affairs, which could be like an entire province away, okay, and collect their books. Or the government could, once a month, have like a home affairs truck drive to these rural areas and hand out the applied for ID books that these people would have successfully been able to get on the internet, right? Apply for on the internet. It could enable so very many things. And then once you have all these people getting ID numbers, and so therefore enabled to write matric, and so therefore can get jobs, apply for jobs. And some jobs you need an ID in order to, I guess, be on their payroll. In order for you to be recognized as a staff member, you need to have an ID book. So it keeps them out of so many employment opportunities. And this, so availing Wi-Fi or internet in such areas as these could significantly reduce such issues as lack of matriculation, lack of finishing high school, and also lack of employment. It would reduce the unemployment rate of this country, like by perhaps like maybe 4%. And I mean, that's huge. I mean, it's more than what it is that we're currently experiencing. Instead, there is a deadbeat unemployment rate, especially among the youth, and the youth are the ones that are with the greatest amount of collateral damage. These people then get older and they find themselves without any money, without any ability to raise their own children. They're having no birth certificates themselves and no ID books themselves. They then struggle to also register their own children. And so it becomes like a generational curse to not be on a national database. It becomes then a generational curse. So you must understand that if at all somebody has such a pioneering idea like that of Elon Musk to hook up internet access from up there in the sky, where your country does not even have to erect any telecommunications poles, and people in the rural areas, insofar as they've got a smartphone, and we all know how most people now have a smartphone, and there are some of the most cheapest smartphones available to people out there that can't afford like an iPhone or whatever. If at all you can enable a person in the rural areas then to get internet access, it makes sure that the 17-year-old student that is in grade 11 is not going to miss their matric, because they can apply for it remotely where they're at, and the government can then organize for their ID to get to them, or for them to travel just once to go and collect it from Johannesburg and then come back to the rural areas where they're staying. This is like a whole real problem in the nation. So, I mean, one would imagine the myriads of challenges that would be corrected by internet access in rural areas. And then not only does that enable, for instance, the application of IDs, it also enables just knowledge acquisition, getting trained, finding essays online or tutors online, you know, where it is that you are struggling with a particular math equation. You can just Google it online and find somebody on YouTube to help you understand a particular math equation. Yeah, that's what internet access means for people in the rural areas. That's what it means for the general well-being of the country at large. And our government, I'm just trying to help you understand why Africa is not your hope. Why Africa is not something that any Christian should be looking at with any level of, at least they haven't capitulated. There is so much evil going on down here in these streets that it's irrelevant that they have not embraced a colorful agenda. They ultimately will, okay? They ultimately will, because they put themselves in a position to need financial aid from the West. And now that the West is trying to push a particular agenda down Africa's throat, they will eventually capitulate, because Africa is busy shooting itself in its foot. Here is South Africa with this Elon Musk Starlink proposition. In all of its corruption, South Africa is super corrupt, okay? In all of its incredible corruption, went and told Elon Musk that he has to agree to give them a deal where the government gets to keep 30% of the funds produced by this Starlink, by the Starlink internet access, whatever. Look, I stand corrected as to what the true nature of this qualm that Elon Musk had was, right? But it has something to do with the figure 30% and our government wanting to take it for themselves before they could ever sign a deal with Elon Musk. So because they were not able to pocket anything with this endeavor, just being frankly more like a humanitarian endeavor, now South Africa is standing to be the only country in Africa where this deal was brokered, but nonetheless fell through. Being Africa's most industrialized economy and taking 10 steps back, South Africa is facing not having access to this particular technology because it is too corrupt to embrace such aid as this without wanting to pocket money for themselves in the government. Elon Musk flat out was like, no. He said no. He said, over my dead body, am I going to facilitate corruption in your government? So South Africa was like, well, I guess bye then, Elon. So here it is that South Africa is in a position to enable itself to not need aid from, I don't know, Russia, and so be so corrupt in helping Russia along. South Africa is in a position to not to not need China so much. But it has made sure that it stays dependent and reliant on countries that are not good for our general pulse. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Well, it's not just South Africa and Africa that has those tendencies with corruption in government, where it is that they cannot, for the life of them, think for the greater good of the people on the ground and forget about their own pockets, since they already have so much pocket already. They've already swindled the country dry. We are living with power cuts that are out of this world, astronomical. We've already got some pretty bad problems. So come on, let this one be the, I guess, one thing where we don't do corruption. But not in South Africa. And I would go so far as to say, not in Africa. In Africa, you're going to have to first go through the barrier to entry called corrupt politician before you can even get to the people. And so because the people will always need help from outside, where African leaders are unprepared to stop being so corrupt, we have put ourselves in a position, therefore, to ultimately embrace the colorful agenda. Because once we are the only continent that's not embracing it, yet literally by far the most satiated, the most, not satiated, but I wanted to say parched continent, we are by far the most ravenous continent in terms of hunger. We are by far the most underskilled, not only underskilled, but underfed. Our health is just declining. All different kinds of strange diseases fester here because of a lack of access to proper water and proper food and what have you. Given that we already have all these challenges that we have in Africa, once things get really rough and people now need, as in there's an epidemic spreading through an African country of sorts, they're going to need Western aid. They're going to need international aid. And when then you are busy asking for help, but you refuse to embrace their caveat, their term and condition, their fine print, when you refuse to take in your stride that which is the condition upon which you will get enabled, then you're gonna, I guess, have to take your epidemic in your stride. Politicians can be ruthless, guys. They will literally watch a plague drop people down until somebody decides to stop the affair. So you are gonna find more and more African nations suddenly legalizing these relationships, and then India in 2018 legalized the relationships. In 2018, India legalized people's ability to be able to freely love who they want to love, but not so much marriage. And now they're trying to not legalize marriage despite being pressurized by it. And Starbucks in India has gone colorful agenda. It's gone woke. In a country where 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, it was illegal, comprehensively illegal to so much as sneeze colorful agenda or alphabet agenda. And here it is at 5 years down the line, a whole corporate that has lost itself in India has gone on right ahead to go woke. Never mind woke, but colorful. It has embraced the colorful agenda after just 5 years of legalizing these relationships. So once you legalize the relationships, that people can do them, but you can't get married, you're ultimately going to be pressurized by corporates that are going to pop up in your joint that come from the West. Starbucks is from the West, and they're going to pressurize your people, your Indians, to all agree, and indeed that has happened in India, more and more people in India are now embracing of this colorful agenda. And if at all you get the mob against the government is ultimately going to then capitulate towards legalizing the marriage then of the colorful people. So it's all very progressive. They slip. It's a slippery slope. So it's going to happen in Africa too, like what happened in India in 2018. 1 year they're going to say, okay, fine, you can love each other, but you can't marry. And then as soon as they say you can love each other, America's going to put a Starbucks, America's going to put a Nike, America's going to put, whatever. Europe, they're all going to put their companies there. And then their companies are going to start advertising, since it's now legal in the country, this agenda, indoctrinating and changing the minds of the Africans on the ground. And once the Africans have then been indoctrinated, the brewing spirit of antagonism against the government's stand is going to cause the government to want to capitulate. And the government is also going to, over and above wanting to capitulate, over and above struggling to not capitulate, not only are they going to have pressure from the mob of human beings that have been indoctrinated by the West because of just simply legalizing their relationships, the pressure, the international pressure to prevent that is blocking humanitarian aid coming into their lands, that is now has been made a necessity because of how corrupt the governments are, too corrupt to successfully build infrastructure, so they won't need so much help from the West. And upon needing this aid, and upon the countrymen themselves being like, but this is not so bad, and upon culture transforming because of Western organizations lodging in these countries, ultimately you're going to find African countries one by one. South Africa was the first one to go. Currently we have a designer in South Africa making swimwear with like bulges in the front that is a female, but for transitioning males. So more and more South Africans are going to pop up all over Africa. In other words, we're going to get countries that nobody would have ever fathomed, ever legalizing. And I'm speaking even Muslim states, ever legalizing. Do you understand? Like the colorful agenda. You are going to find them not only legalizing these relationships, but also the marriages they're in because of corporate pressure, not only corporate pressure, population pressure, not only population pressure, but just need for humanitarian aid coming from outside because they did not strengthen their own governments thanks to corruption. So I spoke all that to help you understand how it is that it is not worth your while as a Christian to look at Africa as a place of hope because there's too much corruption here. We might not have capitulated so much to the colorful agenda as much as the rest of the world has, but we've got other problems. We've got other immoralities that course through our veins that make us an improbable option for solace, for safe haven. I am a persecuted Christian in a country that should not be persecuting Christians. I'm in South Africa. It is an abomination. What's going on here does not make sense. I have got the lifestyle of a Chinese Christian, underground church, isolation, solitude, Korea, North Korea. Like I have got the living conditions of a woman that repents and gives their life to Christ in Iran, but I'm in South Africa. It's already started. It has already started. South Africa was among the first African countries to just get taken away by the woke agenda. And so for those reasons, it is currently one of the most persecuting of believers, and nobody sees it because it doesn't show in broad daylight the way that you would see it, for instance, with the Boko Haram murdering villagers who are Christian in Nigeria. But it's happening in South Africa. So once you embrace woke, like South Africa has embraced the colorful agenda in all of its spectrum, it's legal to even marry here as a colorful person in South Africa. Once it went there, then Christian persecution became just whatever. It's like any other Tuesday in South Africa. It's literally like the UAE, the Middle East somewhere. Like, I don't know. Give me some Middle Eastern country other than Iran. Like, not so much Israel, but Lebanon. Give me like anywhere in the world where there is general hostility against the body of Christ. South Africa looks very much like that. So Africa is not your place to go for solace. There's nowhere to look. There's literally absolutely nowhere to go. Africa will capitulate because Africa loves corruption and Africa loves ancestral worship, witchcraft, African spirituality. It's just like this thing that has grooved its grubby fingers into the very fabric of our societies, and it's not going anywhere. It is literally going absolutely nowhere. It is here to stay. And for as long as a people group continue to worship idols, God will not restrain wrath from it. God is not going to stay his hand from punishing it. He's not. So God might not be punishing Africa for, for the colorful agenda, but he is certainly punishing them for ancestral worship, for witchcraft, for what they're doing to me. My country has only ever gone to the dogs ever since 2014 when I lost everything. It has only ever gotten darker, worse. Resources being extracted, suicide rate has skyrocketed, gender-based violence is on fire. There are so many issues in this country that it is no longer sufferable. No one can call themselves proudly South African without twitching first and basically admitting that there's something very wrong, horribly so, with this picture. We recently just got accused by the West for giving Russia arms or something, facilitating some kind of an arms deal with Russia. Now, I don't know how true that is and where their accusation is coming from there in the West, but parties that are in opposition to each other in this country have come together in loggerheads to basically disagree with the West for accusing them for helping Russia to fight against the Ukraine. That we thought were at enmity with each other, and South Africans are literally leaning on them to be at enmity with each other so we as a country can have hope, because there is no way that we can ever come out of this darkness if at all the EFF, for instance, is allied with the ANC. But Julius Malema just came out and flagrantly dissed the West for accusing them in this regard, instead of asking, or rather capitalizing or riding the wave and saying to the ANC, look, not South Africa, we haven't provided weapons. Maybe the ANC has, because the ANC is crazy. Instead, Julius is standing with the ANC. So you can see, Ore, what Julius is not so much opposition that we can trust, but controlled opposition that is pushing one particular narrative. Do you understand? One particular narrative with the ANC, but on certain days when it's cold or when it's hot, they disagree with each other. Cannot be trusted. Cannot be trusted. And so as South Africans, where do we stand? In the darkness, pitch of night. Even our opposition is not really opposition, it is controlled opposition. We are still standing against Israel. We are still pro-Palestine. And so therefore, as a nation, we are cursed, because the Lord is going to curse those who curse the nation of Israel. So as Africa, as South Africa in totality, we are cursed. And the evidences are in the way that things are going economically, socio-economically. And people think there is hope here. Whatever is going on here in South Africa is going to be happening across all of Africa. Whatever their issues might be, understand that it doesn't matter that they reject the alphabet agenda. Bottom line is, there are other things they embrace that has caused them to cause God's face to look away from them. There is no way to go, guys. The rapture is the only way out. But before then, the body of Christ on earth is about to suffer incredibly. And I'm here to give people strength in that time. That's what this whole message is about. Next part.